We're dealing with states. Do y'all have any questions about any of the terms that are from the chapter 4 with states? Go ahead, Mike.
Just checking for legitimacy that it's just how the people does the government in power have claim over the people by their right, correct?
Legitimacy was actually, I believe, in one of the boxes.
Yeah.
I believe legitimacy was in one of the boxes, and this was from chapter 4. And of course, I'll probably struggle with finding it right now. But there was also really an article that dealt with this too. And let me go to the article first, because this is probably one of the ones that y'all will have forgotten. But it was actually the Ghana article. Legitimacy is basically the idea that you got power in the legally accepted manner.
Okay, so like when they had the people, when they had 2 successful elections in a row?
That's right. That's exactly what it was. And if you remember up here, it says, Ghana is now one of the few African countries to successfully transfer power twice from one legitimately elected leader to another. In both of the classes, I had asked y'all the question, and the question was, what would you rather have?
Yeah.
Would you have a leader that illegally takes power, overthrows the government, and does things? Or would you rather have an ineffective government that legally took power? The legitimate government is the one that took power in its legal prescribed manner. However, they might not get anything done, which ultimately means they're probably going to fail. The other is they overthrew the government, whatever the case might be, and maybe they get more things done. But legitimacy is not what you produce. Legitimacy is how you get into office in the first place. Yes?
Can I ask a different question?
Yes.
In terms of the actual articles, we need to know the articles
Yes.
for the thing. So
With the articles, when you go through and look, you should know that some of them we spent more time on than others. That's basically all that came from the Ghana article, so that's all you need to know.
okay.
Okay? So that's how that's going to work. Yes, Willow?
When it comes to, where was it? Nation versus state. I know each one had different characteristics.
Yeah.
Which one came first?
What did the chapter say? Which one came first, the nation or the state?
Yeah, the classics agree.
The nation.
It said the state, it said the state.
The chapter
Everybody
said
always
the state.
says it's the nation, and this is the key point on this. When you think back to it, the nation, it seems like it makes sense that it should. The nation was the language, it was the history, it was the culture, it was the people, when you think about it, that group identity.
But
The state is the government. And when you think about it, it always makes sense that the people would come together and then they would create a government. But in fact, the argument from the chapter is like the United States. It took the government to come together to make us Americans. So I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to ask you what you think or what I think, but this would be one that would be what the chapter says, and it was the nation that did not come first, but the state that actually did.
Well, if we had a question like that, would we have to explain why the nation?
Being able to explain the difference between nation and state would be good, and the chapter makes mention of different examples. When you think about nation, you could think about the Jewish population. I believe is one that it mentions as a really good example of a nation. And I think we've also mentioned the idea of borders or countries, because people don't always know borders. They don't always live within a certain area. And the Jewish population for a long time was that way. People oftentimes associate a state or a government with an actual landmass too. So there would be ways that you could describe that, but definitely look that over. The gist of it is that it's the government, the ruling body is the state, and the gist of it is that language, that history, that tradition, these types of things, that shared group identity that makes a nation. A nation. What else have you got? As you look at just these chapter 4 terms right now. I'll be honest with you, looking at these while you think. Political science, politics, politicians, and polity, there's only so much that I could do with those. Although with polity, if I'm not mistaken, we did have some article examples. Do y'all remember what a polity was?
A group of like-minded people.
Polity is a group of like-minded people. And can you think of any examples of that?
Political parties, activists, just anyone with a common goal in mind. They can differ on a lot of other subjects,
Yeah.
but as long as they have one common thing binding them together.
When you think about it, a polity is a group of like-minded individuals, and they could be inclusive in the sense that they want to include other like-minded individuals. They could actually be a polity that is against others as well. And the very specific example from an article that I had given you all dealing with polity was the taco stand article. Do y'all remember the taco stand article?
Yeah.
The taco stand article basically breaks down about 5 or 6 different laws, if you remember, that dealt specifically with Latino, Hispanic population in Georgia in the beginning by banning the taco stands, but also other places. You have to order in English in order to order a cheesesteak at Pat's, for example. The idea that we're going to make it illegal and punish people that rent to illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants, these kinds of things. So all of these were some of the examples from that one. And this is a really good example of a polity because, like I said, when you think about it, pro-life or pro-choice, you want like-minded individuals. But that taco stand article is an example of like-minded individuals being against a particular group. And that's why it's a really good example of a polity.
Isn't even at that point the KKK technically?
Yeah,
a polity?
you could mention the Klan. You could mention, I mean, the Boston Red Sox are playing for the World Series right now. You could mention Red Sox Nation is an example of a polity. And I think for both of your classes, I had used the example that your PS 105 is a polity. Because the one thing that binds you right now is the fact that you're all in that class. You may never speak again in your respective groups after you leave that class. But for now, that's an example of a polity.
And you even related that, I think, to the workplace, didn't you?
Not as much on that one, but you could. What else have you got from this? Because we only have less than an hour. Go ahead.
For politicians, I remember you saying it doesn't necessarily have to be someone in the government.
Right.
It could also be like a newscaster.
When you think about politicians, we're talking about people that are within or that actually impact in the government. So, you know, President Obama is, there's no doubt about this. A state governor would be, or a congressperson would be. These are all really good examples of politicians. But you could also argue, and I think in both classes I used the example of Al Sharpton. Somehow he's got a news broadcast on MSNBC, but he is an advocate much more than he is a news person. And there's no denying that he is a politician. The law enforcement officers, you can't tell me that when Trayvon was shot, that the people that investigated that case, even though they were not trying to serve in an elected capacity, don't deny that they weren't politicians, because they absolutely were as too, based on that circumstance. So law enforcement, interest groups, people that are actually elected, people that are influencing the government, like in Al Sharpton, for example, these would all be good examples of
Would that be
politicians.
influencing the government or influencing the voters?
Well, I think it's primarily dealing with influencing the government. And I don't want to go too far on that, because this will be a very small part of the exam. Go ahead.
With chapter 7,
Are we supposed to-
Let's stick with 4 first. Yeah, let's stick with 4. A bigger part of it, laissez-faire, welfare state, statism, and socialism. Are y'all comfortable with those terms? If you remember, and let me stress this to you, I gave you 2 belief quizzes. The first one was dealing with the government's role in terms of regulating and redistributing within the economy. And these are the 4 terms that deal with this. Liberal, conservative, libertarian, and populist dealt with the belief quiz where we had bedroom and wallet. And sometimes people can shift those up, so make sure that you've got a good grasp on those. Go ahead, Joy.
When you ask us about laissez-faire, I went back and read the chapter, and there's a lot more detail on sort of historically how it
Yeah.
became laissez-faire. Do you want us to include that as well? Or
It's
is it
up to
more-
you. I mean, when you think about it, to be honest with you, these 4 terms could end up being a short answer question, or these 4 terms could end up being multiple choices. And what I typically do is for one of the classes, the bedroom wallet will be the short answer, and then laissez-faire welfare state will be multiple choice. For the other class, welfare and laissez-faire are going to be the multiple choice, and the belief quiz itself is going to be short answer. So I switch up those 2, so you're not going to get the same dip both times, but make sure that you know the difference.
Okay, and when you say short answer, paragraph?
These
or-
are going to be 5 or 10 point questions.
Okay.
And let me stress this, and I've said this in both classes. You give me a 3 out of 5, you get 3 points. You give me a 5-point answer, it's 5 out of 5. If you write me a 7-point answer, it becomes 7 out of 5. So detail does help. And to be honest with you, in terms of use in the book, you mentioned that there's some details there. The quotes and the outlines are really good to know, especially if I've gone back and referred to those several times. And there are 2 or 3 of those quotes that I really have, but I don't believe that they were in chapter 4. We'll get back to
Is
that.
it possible for me to come to you after this? Last week when I was sick, the
Yeah.
week before, I've asked different people in the class, no one takes
Let's do
notes.
this. Let's see how much we get through, and then we'll see if you have to.
Okay.
For these 4, the relationship between regulation and redistribution, which
was
one of them?
X-axis, which was Y-axis?
I don't think I'm going to test you on that. But
Is
here's
that
the
what
question. Here's the question for you. Which one believed in regulating and redistributing?
Well,
Not the welfare state.
Sorry, believed in regulation and redistribution?
Yes.
Me.
And you were a
I was a socialist.
socialist. Socialist is going to believe in regulating and redistributing, government regulating and government redistributing. So the opposite of socialism is going to be what? Laissez-faire is the one that's going to believe in not regulating, typically, and not redistributing. Now, understand on this, when you look at it, the relationship between government regulation and redistribution is what I'm going to want you to be thinking about. Now, in terms of laissez-faire, do you remember the example of the article that I gave you? It's a very good one.
Wasn't it the Liberals Paradise one?
It was actually the
Libertarian
one that was
paradigm?
dealing with paid vacations.
Oh, right.
Paid vacations was the really good example of the idea of laissez-faire or laissez-faire or however the French decide that they'd like to say it. But the idea was that the United States, does it guarantee paid vacation? It does not. It's up to the business. And the argument is that in some countries, many of the European ones, in fact, they guarantee weeks and weeks. Even China guarantees, and Japan guarantees weeks, but the United States does not guarantee paid vacation. This is a really good example of laissez-faire because the government is not getting involved in overly regulating.
Do you need
Go ahead.
us to remember which article is attached to which?
I
Or
think
is it
it's
gonna be
usually a
something-
very good idea in short answers, when you show me what you know, to be able to link a term with an article. And oftentimes it's going to be implied in the question. Sometimes it's going to be very, very specific. But, I mean, it's going to be a good idea. These are examples typically of ones that only had one article, though. Now, for socialism, I don't believe I really gave you a socialist article, although the one that maybe you could kind of get a little bit squirrely with was, I mean, well, there were a couple that maybe you could argue. The Rick Santelli link is not really an article, but if you remember, that was the one that was talking about whether we should bail out the foreclosures or the losers' mortgages, as Santelli had said. And I might would pay attention to that one a little bit. Getting back to the terms, and then I'll come back and hit the hands.
Oh,
When-
could you go over welfare state versus statism?
Yeah, and like I said, getting back to the terms, there's 2 other terms that are left, and one of them is welfare state and the other one is status. So how did they fall on this?
in favor on
Yeah, which one was in favor and which one was
Welfare
against?
state was pro redistribution and against regulation?
No,
Yeah, that's right. No, wait.
no, they
No,
weren't against
no.
regulation.
They
for
were
regulation.
actually in opposite quadrants. So, no, they weren't both against regulation. One was against regulation, one was against redistribution.
Yes.
So when you look at this, the statists were the ones that were in favor of regulation, and they were against redistribution. And this was Hitler's Germany. And I had given you 3 articles that dealt with this, I believe. Looking back on this, if you remember, there was the death panel article that was dealing with the death panel that would determine who would get medical care. That was a very good statist article. The other one on this was the Romeo and Juliet assisted suicide article. And take a good look at that one too, because this was another one where, when you think back to it, they were both dealing with money issues.
And that's for
Determining,
statism.
that was statism. They were determining a person's worth in order to determine in the death panel article whether they should be allowed, when you think about it, to get the treatment. The other one was talking about forcing people to commit suicide or assisted suicide so that their families could reap the benefits, although there was a matter of choice that was in that one that divided classes too. And then that last one was welfare state. And if you remember, welfare state believed in redistribution and no regulation.
that would be like a Marxist kind of thing.
Well, that would be a lot of those
European
European type countries, yeah, a lot of the European type countries, in fact, and they mentioned that. And the thing that was most distinctive was that they believed in very, very high taxes in order to pay for these services. And one of the themes that has come up is, who can actually spend my money better? Can I spend my money than the government, or can the government spend my money better for me? And when you think about it, if you're dealing with the welfare state, you're arguing that the government can spend it better for you than you can spend it for yourself. If you're dealing more with a laissez-faire type of a system, you're saying, I want lower taxes, I want to spend my money better, or I can spend my money better than the government can spend it for me. And that's another one of those tug of wars that we've had. So those are those four terms. I saw several, go ahead, Scott.